I'm on my own here. I'm actually not by myself. This place is deserted. Earlier in the day, Albert departed, claiming to have meetings in the city. Away from town, Cyrus is. He continues to disregard my needs in favor of his incessant pursuit of the world. For the last many years, we've been apart, and I've been on my own. The house feels deserted. Every morning when I first open my eyes, it's as if I'm transported to another planet. On the other hand, I feel a bit more liberated today. My bra and black leggings are all I'm wearing. My mind wanders to a place where all the pieces gradually fit together while I tidy. It's dead quiet here. Exactly 0 people. Cyrus isn't supposed to be back in town until the weekend, and I know Albert won't even arrive until late tonight. I find solace in the solitude and stillness. I am free to be alone, but no one else. Not a soul. Since when did I last feel this way? Descending into the abyss, existing unnoticed by everybody. It seems almost liberating. At times, I feel that my life is lacking excitement and might use some reviving. I kid you not. And I think about that whenever I'm in that mood. As for that large, dark-colored plaything, its presence inadvertently calls to mind itself at the most inconvenient times as it perches in the corner of the shelf. At times, when no one is around to witness or hear it, something starts to move inside of me. I own this. In the depths of my being, a fleeting escape. I can play alone with this toy for a little while. In order for me to continue uploading more interesting true stories, please subscribe to my channel. This video is going to get really intriguing towards the conclusion, so make sure you watch it all the way through. At that moment, a noise. A little squeak sounds as the door opens. Unprepared, my eyes dart to the glimmer of light penetrating the door. My chest feels as if it is going to explode from the constant beating of my heart. My horizons expand. At that particular second, time stands still. Cyrus is the one, the son of Stepson. Standing partially concealed by the shadows behind the door, he observes me in silence. There's a split second when time stands still. What we do is look deeply into one another's eyes. As though we're frozen in time, his eyes appear to take in everything around us. Can we expect him to go on? Would he rather remain motionless? No longer was he a child. Now he was 22 years old. Truly, I was unnerved by his young. My whole body was in disarray as my heart pounded and I tried to make sense of it all. His eyes, it ignited a fire within me. My heart skipped a beat. I was at a loss for what to do at that very moment. I only met his gaze, and he returned the gesture. Within me, a whirlwind of feelings churned. Quite disorganized. Very strong. How much longer was that period of quiet? Can you spare a moment? How about half? An hour? Oh, and then I hear it. That delicate rustling. Such an inexplicable change. Someone reaches behind the door and slightly widens the opening. With a single stride, Cyrus advances. When I speak, my voice is soft and low. Just what are you up to? There is no genuine tone to the query. Still, it's profound in its own way. Everything came to a halt for an instant. At that same second, Cyrus's eyes were the only things visible to me. His piercing, mocking stare made it seem like he knew my innermost thoughts and feelings. Meanwhile, he appeared nearly happy. Seemed as though he was finding this enjoyable. It was hard for me to look away. It felt as though the world had collapsed on me. My pulse was racing so rapidly. Aside from the sound of my own breathing, nothing else was audible to me. He remarked that you had good taste. That tone of taunting was in his voice. But he seemed to mean it when he said it. It was as if his remarks held some secret satisfaction. At that very second, an unsettling feeling began to develop within me. I felt uneasy with his every action as he watched me. I could still make out a message in his eyes despite the whirlwind of questions racing through my head. He also complimented Aisha on her beauty. The words that came out of his mouth seemed to come from another dimension. My emotions were so jumbled that I felt myself sliding as I attempted to decipher his meaning. He looked at me as if he already knew everything without meaning to. A more cautious approach is required, he advised. However, that was more than a caution. Like he was trying to impart some wisdom to me. For a second there, I felt like a prey animal. Although I felt a tingle, there was also this peculiar tug. I was at a loss for what to do. You know those times when you're both curious and terrified? It was that. He was drawing near, and I could feel it, but I was also attempting to keep my distance. He then shifted his tone. "I know, stepmom," he remarked with an air of near mockery. "My dad is 65 years old. He has apparently stopped paying attention to you." As soon as he said that statement, my heart broke. As if he had all the answers. He appeared to take pleasure in playing this game, which explained his father's apathy about the situation. He claimed that he wasn't paying attention, but the tone of his speech suggested otherwise. Something was rocking me from the inside out. My emotions remained a mystery to me. His expression, that sly grin, was something I couldn't help but notice. Everything seemed to be calculated by him. My own conflicts intensified the moment our gazes met. Resentment toward him, along with an unexplained attraction. Something about him seemed to draw me in too closely, but I soon realized that this intimacy was all a trap and a game. Although he retreated a step later, I still had the impression that he wasn't leaving me any room. I felt entangled. He looked at me with an air of subtle amusement, and I was drawn in. It seemed as though he was subtly signaling that this is far from done. In fact, it is only the beginning. I was at a loss for what to do at that very moment. To this day, I am still speechless and unable to respond. The things he had spoken, the whirlwind of emotions engulfing me, the void, the peculiar attraction, and the mental anarchy were all too much for me to handle. Everything fit together, even though it didn't make sense at first. The depths of introspection continued as I sank farther into the abyss of my own thoughts and emotions. There was an unusual quietness as we took our seats at the supper table. Like in the past, Albert was clumsily preparing food, while Cyrus sat quietly in the corner, staring at me with his peculiar smile. I felt a strange unease building inside me as I ate silently, conscious of his stare. Something was hinted at by Cyrus's intense stare, but I failed to fully understand it. The room was made cozier by Albert's cheerful countenance, but something was lacking. Albert, as usual, was lost in thought, preoccupied with the house and the food. It felt as if I had entered a whole other reality. Gently putting his hand on the back of my chair, Cyrus whispered, "Enjoy your meal," as he walked over to the table. His comments were courteous, but I sensed something deeper. Even if I didn't, I found them odd. His fingers delicately ran over my shoulder, a sign that he had noticed my attention. My emotions were all over the place, but I made a hasty effort to compose myself. The thought of those delicate strokes made my heart race. No matter how much I tried to put it all in the past, the sensation of Cyrus's tender touch on my skin was a constant reminder that nothing would ever be the same. In the course of the meal, Cyrus's movements became more methodical. His hand began to delicately brush across mine as we sat at the table. I considered turning away, but my gaze never left him. What was it that was changing? I could sense it. As if everything had transformed overnight, time seemed to have accelerated. I swiftly attempted to remove my hands, but as soon as our gazes connected, he shot me that piercing, frightful expression once more. An unfamiliar heat enveloped my body as a sudden surge of warmth surged through me. I felt a shudder go through my body. Though I was still confused about my actions, I was responding to him and coming to terms with my feelings for him. I was attempting to evade Cyrus's ever-increasing stare. But I was helpless in the face of this heat and this draw. Suffocation seemed to accompany each breath I took. It was then that I felt the full weight of my isolation and the magnitude of what was lacking. Nothing escaped Albert's notice. It was both strange and fascinating to me because of how unfamiliar everything felt. I looked up into Cyrus's eyes as he gently caressed my hand in a new way. It was as if all of my long-forgotten memories were flooding back to me at that one moment. It seemed unusual to feel this way again at the age of 55. I was, strangely enough, rather thrilled. I could feel the fire rising inside me till it reached my throat. For a while, I couldn't tell how much time had passed, but I eventually felt Albert stare from across the table. Even though he remained engrossed in his meal, Cyrus's watchful gaze followed me wherever I went. Blurring began to affect my vision. At that same second, a shift was occurring deep within my body. Every part of my body was experiencing a jumble of feelings. My inner turmoil became more intense with each passing moment spent with him. Dinner had been served by the time the sun went down. In silence, Cyrus and Albert got up from the table. For some reason, I couldn't stop staring at them, and I still couldn't relax. Some strange unease washed over me. Gradually, I got to my feet, and the further I walked to my room, the more disorganized I felt on the inside. Upon returning to my room, I felt that icy warmth all over again this time. It wasn't limited to my body. And it was my very essence as well. I flopped my head down on the pillow, confused about what to do next. Despite the pain in my eyes, I was unable to get any rest. I couldn't stop thinking about the time Cyrus's hands touched me. A restless night attempted to compel me to sleep, but each time I closed my eyes, the internal tug, the jumbled emotions resurfaced. Despite my best efforts, I was unable to fall asleep that night. I felt a jumble of heat and cold sensations as I genuinely woke up. Albert had departed the previous morning to pay a friend a visit. In the house, Cyrus and I were alone. Although I was relieved by Albert's absence, there was something very disconcerting about it. I could still feel Cyrus's eyes and movements, as if anything may happen at any moment. Cyrus was seated at the table in his bathrobe when I walked downstairs to get breakfast. He rarely ate breakfast this late, but something was different about today. For a split second, I felt vulnerable because of the way the robe drooped over his figure. I tried very hard not to, but I couldn't help but look at him. A small grin spread across Cyrus's face as he caught sight of me. Moving fearlessly toward the table, he took a seat. In a playful manner, he asked, "Where were you when I looked for you first thing in the morning?" Somewhere inside, I had a shift and I couldn't answer. Despite my jumbled emotions, they were all directed toward him. Cyrus's consciousness seemed to be penetrating deep into my very being. Even though he took a different approach this time, he still came over to the table to lend me a hand as I made breakfast. With each stride I took, I could sense his shadow lingering behind me. Suddenly, he leaned in closer and grasped my shoulder. "I am eagerly looking forward to attending to your requirements," he whispered clearly. The words resounded in my head, softly and profoundly. Something inside of me broke, and it hurt like hell yet felt good in an odd way. I felt roused in some way by Cyrus's approach. His every gesture was like a gentle caress against my flesh. I felt even more exposed for an instant as my gaze, almost unconsciously, shifted to him. My internal state of bewilderment continued to worsen. I felt like everything was coming together just then, so I slowly decided to have my breakfast and then go to bed. I was making my way to the stairs when he abruptly pulled me close by the waist. Gradually but resolutely, my heart began to race. He embraced me firmly. There was a split second when I was at a loss for words and emotions. However, at that very moment, my entire being fell silent. As my heart raced and my breath became shallow, I knew I had succumbed to his embrace. It was all very sudden and out of the blue. I could never shake the combination of thrill and sorrow. I gently separated myself from Cyrus, shut my eyes, and inhaled deeply. My legs were shaky when I stood up from the bed. I wanted to put that time out of my mind. How, though, could I possibly do it? I was consumed with regret on one side and intensified by curiosity and an unexplained heat on the other. Taking a shower was my decision. I was hoping to unwind a little bit by soaking in the warm water. Droplets of water raced over my skin as the water sprayed down, but they were no match for the mental chatter that plagued me. The sounds of Cyrus's mocking, the impressions he gave me, and the scars he left behind were all very much with me. This shouldn't have transpired, yet for some reason I was unable to prevent it. As much as I wanted to dwell on how terrible everything I had done was, I couldn't help but notice how quickly something new had blossomed inside of me. Some emotion was sparked in me by the fact that Cyrus used Albert's youth as a pretext to conduct these tricks. Everything was getting more risky up until Albert found out, but I knew then that it would all end. All too frequently, Cyrus and I would find ourselves on our own. Although I felt remorse, I still desired it. Even though I realized we were making a mistake, I couldn't help but feel like there was nothing more we could do. Cyrus was back in the kitchen the other day when I was going to get a drink. It was as if nothing had transpired. His expression conveyed his desire to approach me once more. He came up to me swiftly and quietly. With each stride he made, I could sense my heart pounding. Out of nowhere, he encircled my waist with his arms and drew near my ear. "Do you not understand anything?" He spoke with an even more accusatory tone this time. As he drew nearer, he placed one hand on my waist. "I may have tricked my dad, but this game is far from over." Cyrus's remark sliced through me like a knife and went deep into my thoughts. His intimate tone of voice exacerbated my already intense emotions and emotional turmoil. At that very moment, though, I perceived the sound of a door opening. I went completely still. Entering the room was Albert. In a flash, my entire mental framework came tumbling down. As soon as Albert banged the door shut, he fixed his gaze on us. He quickly noticed that Cyrus and I had gone absolutely limp from fear. His embrace drew me nearer, his arms still encircling my waist. Everything ground to a halt as soon as Albert's unexpected entrance was felt. No matter how courageous I felt I was, at that anxious moment I understood how perilous it all was. The moment Albert stepped foot in the house, the whole situation changed. Cyrus and I were already on edge, and it was getting much worse at that moment. It was clear that Albert was uncomfortable when he hurriedly closed the door and looked directly at us. His expressionless eyes betrayed a range of emotions. "Excuse me, what's happening?" With a quivering voice that seemed like it would crack at any moment, Albert inquired. Albert glanced over from Cyrus to me as he continued to draw me closer with his arms around my waist. As time went on, the pall of quiet in the room became thicker. Albert began to approach us at a leisurely pace. He looked at me in a way that I will never forget. It seemed like a tsunami of disorder was sweeping over the world at that particular moment. "Excuse me, what are you up to?" "My son, you're Cyrus." "How in the world did I bring up a child who would act this way?" "Aisha, I'm married to you." "What on earth is going on?" Every syllable that came out of Albert's mouth was like a nail being driven into our skulls. His voice was reeking of shock and rage. "Dad, you've got it all wrong," Cyrus said as he pretended to be innocent. The intensity of Albert's anger, however, skyrocketed. He looked dead serious. Before now, I had never witnessed him so enraged. At that very time, not even his own son could he believe. "Surely you must be joking. Your stepmother is also my wife. In this house, what on earth is happening?" "Oh my, what a disaster we've created," he shouted. Albert stomped more firmly and swiftly toward Cyrus. The strain of his indignation and skepticism caused his voice to break. However, the terror he betrayed was equally palpable. It was impossible for me to explain, no matter how hard I tried. It was as if something had happened and I still didn't get it. But it was obvious of one thing. At this point, everything had changed. After a brief moment of inaction, Cyrus spun around and hurried back to his room. Yet, Albert had more to accomplish. Following him, he yelled, "Leave now. I've had enough of you." The stifling silence that followed Cyrus's ejection from the house was the last straw. Uncertainty and dread permeated the atmosphere. Albert studied me, inhaled deeply, but uttered no word. A slow, swaying motion was all he did to express himself. At that same second, I realized that a chapter had closed. It was all altered, though, by the disappointment and wrath that stared back at Albert. Albert and I did not speak a word to each other that day. Speaking would have simply served to heighten the oppressive stillness that pervaded the room. Neither my actions nor my emotions were clear. Everything was completely incorrect, I realized. On the other hand, the void inside me just became deeper. Albert completely avoided communicating with me in the days that ensued. All of a sudden, the vibe in the house changed. I felt my resolve erode as I watched the sadness and despair in his eyes. Like strangers sharing a room, we seemed icy and distant from one another. Albert let the gravity of my actions sink in through his quiet. How completely everything had fallen apart. Our losses were immense. Albert informed me he wanted a divorce 1 week after that. He detailed how disastrous things had become. How our distance had grown to the point that reconciliation seemed impossible. Nothing could be fixed, he thought to himself. Everything in my life shifted at that second. Both of us were saddened by the divorce decision. Maybe, though, we had both anticipated it in our hearts. My 15-year marriage to Albert ended abruptly. Everything had collapsed in that little period. Things might fall apart in an instant, and I realized this with an immense sense of regret and anguish in my heart. Perhaps I also came to terms with the fact that it was inevitable at the same moment. We were left with nothing but the fading recollection of a love and tranquility that had long since faded away. I can tell this narrative had a profound effect on you because you've come this far. More information is available. I can assure you that you will not want to miss a moment of it. Please consider subscribing, enabling notifications, and commenting with your thoughts. Leave a comment with your thoughts. I can't wait to hear your side of the argument. I am incredibly grateful for your support.